message from the Indian Prime Minister to all of you. Thank you so much once again for joining us at SAGARMANTHAN. The next session is the Afro-Asian Century, Connecting the Heartlands of Growth. On the panel, we'll have Anusha Gavankar, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, Jeffrey Kaituko, Principal Secretary, State Department for Shipping and Maritime Affairs at the Ministry of Mining, Blue Economy and Maritime Affairs in Kenya, Lord Karan Bilemoria, House of Lords of the United Kingdom, Ruben Arias, Secretary General, Forum Oceano, Portugal, Unmesh Wag, Chairman, Jawaharlal Nehru Port Authority, and of course our dear friend Ayode Alakija, Chair, Board of Directors at FIND and Co-Chair of the G7 Impact Investment Initiative in Global Health. Session titled The Afro-Asian Century, Connecting the Heartlands of Growth would be discussing what do African countries, India and their partners in Europe and West Asia require in terms of infrastructure to turn this potential into reality, how can pools of global finance and world-class tech be made available for the task of building this connectivity infrastructure. If I could get a thumbs up from the production desk on the stage, I'll invite all the speakers. Okay, we're good to go. The stage is ready. Ayode Alakija, Chair, Board of Directors, if I could invite you on stage to moderate the session. If I could invite now the speakers on stage, Anusha Gavankar, Jeffrey Kaituko, Lord Karan Bilemoria, Ruben Arias, and Unmesh Wag. Dr. Alakija, over to you.
Thank you, Shub. Namaste. It is wonderful to be here with everybody. And it's been already an exciting morning. We have a thrilling panel for you. I am honored to be joined by these esteemed panelists. They've all been introduced to you already. And we are going to have a wonderful conversation about oceans and green shipping corridors. I'm going to start with Anusha because we really want to take the most of the time that we have. We don't want to, spend it in introductions. You can read the introduction from the program that's in front of you. So I'm going to dive right into it. Anusha, over to you.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, thank you, Yodi. Hi, everybody. As an urban sociologist, I think I'd like to right up front bring to attention the role of port cities and coastal cities in the entire blue economy system, not just as engines of economic growth, but I think as centers of rich culture, rich heritage, and most maritime economies have thousands of years of heritage. So I'd like to bring to attention the role of that in the development of the blue economy system. And for something like that, I think it requires a people-first approach, a multi-stakeholder approach, as we need to look at generating employment and supporting trade in these cities. And this is going to be what I'm going to draw attention to in this panel. Also, most importantly, I think the other thing that we were discussing a while ago with Yodi, and Yodi brought to attention about how port cities and coastal cities of the global south can emerge as thought leaders to bring an innovative model into place where we have sustainable port city development, to look at cities as not just centers of drivers of economic growth, but also as centers of para-diplomacy.
Thank you very much, Anusha. So we're talking about how the economies of India and the African continental free trade area, basically Africa, will both approach 5 trillion in the coming years. To do that, there are certain things that need to happen. So I'm going to go to Ruben to talk up to us about shipping channels. Ruben from Portugal.
Thank you, Yodi. At the moment, it is not due to climate change and environmental challenges, but also to the necessity and the ultimate need of diversifying sources of energy for the shipping industry and ports. The adoption of clean fuels like hydrogen, ammonia, or others, and also electricity, is being considered an option, but also the comeback of wind propulsion, even into container ships. So adopting and inserting the rigid sails with technology that comes from the airline industry, again, to the container ships. This seems far-fetched, but it is already happening on the ground. And this means that if by one way the transportation will be cleaner, another way, or can be cleaner, the energy density of the new options is much lower than the conventional fossil fuels. So this means that it will be needed to have more efficiency in the vessels, but also it will mean the need for more stopovers along the way for refueling the ships. So this means that if you consider the position and geographical position and the potential and also the market potential of India and its position as a rimland of the heartland of Asia, Europe is also a rimland of the heartland of Asia. And there is a huge market, it's called Africa, that has a lot of potential if we are able to design a shipping route that has these characteristics of cleaner and also that enhances local production. So hydrogen needs to be locally produced, preferably using renewables. So the sub-Saharan Africa is very abundant in natural resources that are available for producing hydrogen in a sustainable way. So if we have a green shipping corridor between India, Africa, and the European Union and Europe, that will enhance trade along the way. It will enhance the local economies in a high value chain, because the hydrogen, as I said, has to be locally produced and then locally stored, and then for refueling the ships, and also for the repair and maintenance, because these, this kind of vessels will have more apparatus, and that will grow the need of having better, local support for this new technology, new type of vessels, and also the digital part. This has to be done in integration with artificial intelligence applications and geospatial applications for connecting, to satellites or optimizing the routes, but also the advanced vessel dynamics, so that you can optimize the route and the energy usage. So without going, I would say, deeper into technical details, just to give some numbers, the European Union is the largest trade partner of India, and 80% of that trade is done by ocean. So if we are able, between our two subcontinents, to do a shipping corridor that catalyzes the development of the sub-Saharan African economies and also the North African economies, that will have a huge impact, because it will grow economy without destroying ecology and restoring ocean health.
Well, thank you very much, Ruben. You've raised some very interesting points there. You talk about, Europe being Africa's largest trading partner, and the linkage between India, Africa, and Europe. You talk about the potential in Africa and the possibilities. I always like to talk about the potential and the possibilities. We'll get into a little bit later. I'd love to hear a little bit more about this artificial intelligence and how that works. And maybe that's a sub-topic. But we talk about Africa, my beloved continent. We talk about Africa and the huge market potential. We talk about Africa, which we pray and hope will be the next rising giant of the future. And as you spoke, I also, it came to mind some of the words of the ministers as he spoke earlier, talking about tourism and ports and inland waterways sort of were coming to mind. But as you speak about linkages between Europe and Africa, I want to go to Africa. I want to go to my brother, Jeffrey, and ask him about, you know, I would imagine some of that green corridor would pass through Kenya and would, you know, it would include Lamu and Mombasa and some of your ports. What is going on in Kenya? You talk about new ports being developed and being built. How are we in Africa preparing? Because you speak not just to Kenya, but to the wider African continent. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. I am delighted to be part of this panel and this great conversation which is taking place here in India. Now, going straight into the question, as you all know, the location of Africa is very strategic, both to Europe and Asia. We are actually an island continent. We are surrounded by water. And so whether you're in the northern part of Africa, you have the Mediterranean Sea, the western part of Africa, you have the Atlantic Ocean, up to the southwest, and then East Africa, where I am located, we have Western Indian Ocean. Now for us we as Africa, there is already a platform that has been created by the African Union through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is in totality, when it's going to be fully implemented, will be targeting a market of 1.3 billion people. And so that is a very huge opportunity which lies in the African continent. But also, and as we speak about that, we all know that ports are gateways to international trade. In Kenya, we have the port of Mombasa, which is one of the biggest ports in Africa. And we have another port called the Port of Lamu, which is a newer port. Then in our neighboring country of Tanzania and others like Mozambique, South Africa, and also in West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and also in North Africa, Morocco. We have also Djibouti. All these ports are important ports, and also the port of Alexandria in Egypt. These are very important ports for us. Now, it happens that we are embracing integration at a time when decarbonization is becoming a big agenda, and therefore we have to modernize our ports. A port like the port of Mombasa now, we have to make it a green port as we expand it. We also, for the newer ports which are under construction, we must fully make them green ports. And also, because we have huge potential in renewable energy sources in Africa. I'll say that in my country, up to 70% of our power source is actually from renewable energy sources. So then, how do we tap into this potential? We must first ensure that we connect every part of Africa, adopt the multimodal forms of transport, whether it is air, rail, roads rather, and ensure and also the sea, and ensure that we are really fully connected. Once that has happened, we can also be able to connect with the other neighboring continents, like West Asia, and then India. It takes a very short time for you to get from Kenya to India, and also Europe. And this will require heavy and massive investment in infrastructural development, and therefore we will need additional resources. And as I look at Africa, any new infrastructure that must happen now has to be financed through largely PPPs, because that is the only way we can get large projects developed within our continent. And secondly is also to look into regional financial institutions like Africa Development Bank and other institutions like Asian Investment Bank here, the European Bank, and see if also we can partner with those institutions so that we can develop the infrastructure that is needed for the future. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You raised the issue of finance at the end there, and I'd like to delve into that a little later. But you make some, it's really interesting because as we try to travel across Africa, even within Africa, it's really often easier to fly to Europe than it is to fly from one African country to the other. So what if we develop our waterways? I was recently in Brazzaville, and to get from DRC Congo to Brazzaville in itself, which is literally, you can see it. I mean, you could almost swim it if it weren't for, nasty things in the water. You can't, because the water connection is not really developed. So we do need to do a lot with that in intra-development as well. But I think also as we talk about this growth of the economy and expanding our economies, it is absolutely critical that we're able to connect better with the rest of the world. My Lord Karen.
Thank
over
you.
to you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And a pleasure to be with all of you here today. And just putting a bit of historical context to this. My grandfather's, Brigadier Belamoya's cousin, was Admiral Kausaji, who was the chief of the Indian Navy. And my great aunt was a Wadia. And the Wadia family built ships for the British Navy. And the oldest ship afloat outside America, the whole of the rest of the world, is a ship called HMS Trincomalee, built by the Wadias in India 200 years ago. And it is afloat in Hartlepool in northeast England. And I went on board that ship when it was near Portsmouth, afloat there as a boy with my great aunt. And recently I went back on board that boat, built by Zoroastrian Parsees here in India, still afloat 200 years later, made out of teak. And it's a proper Battle of Trafalgar type warship, built just after the Battle of Trafalgar. So this is the history that we have between the UK and India when it comes to shipbuilding that the Minister spoke about earlier, and India's ambitions of shipbuilding. In the UK, our armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, the senior service is not the Army, it is the Royal Navy. That is the respect that is given to shipping and the Navy. And I'm a board member of the International Chamber of Commerce in the UK, and I'm about to take over as the chair of the ICC UK, and we promote trade. And if you look at trade flows around the world, it's amazing how it can increase substantially just within a year. I looked at a map recently of world trade flows, and you see the increase between certain parts of the world, and you see the change depending on policies. So who knows what's going to happen next year when it comes to trade flows around the world based on America's tariffs. Inter-Asia trade is growing very, very rapidly including China and Southeast Asia. India's trade flows and goods are growing phenomenally when you look at this map across the world. And the other area that we're looking at with the ICC is digital trade. Do you know that in the European Union, to this day, only 1% to 2% of the trade is digital? The rest of it is billions and billions of pieces of paper. Now, come on. Surely by now we should be moving to digital trade around the world. And the proof is in the UK we're moving to it. The efficiency improves multifold. The time saved, the money saved, the speed at which you can conclude transactions. So we're promoting that. India has expertise when it comes to fraud and security in trade that we can all learn from. And then when you look at India's container ports, and I'm very happy that Chairman of Jawaharlal Nehru Port in Mumbai is here. I had the privilege of leading a parliamentary delegation from the UK, and we visited your very impressive port, and the way in which you have partnered with different countries. My only embarrassment is that the UK should be one of the partners and we are not. And I'm pushing my government to make sure that we are at your port as a partner in your port. And when it comes to shipbuilding, the way things change, the UK, Glasgow, used to be the shipbuilding headquarters in the world. The expertise, the academic expertise, Glasgow University's shipbuilding architecture expertise, it was a cluster. Doesn't exist anymore. Things move on. And finally, when it comes to Europe, Africa, India, which we will discuss in more detail, I want you to just conclude with this. I was president of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, the equivalent of the CII here in India for 2 years in 2020, 2022, including during the start of the Ukraine war. And do you know, soon after the war started, in May 2020, I attended the B7 before the G7 to represent the UK in Berlin. And the biggest problem we had at that time was that no grain was flowing from Ukraine because the Ukrainian ports have been taken over by Russia except for the port of Odessa. And the grain could flow from Odessa, but the Odessa port was blocked. And the head of the UN Food Program said, if that port is not unblocked, millions, tens of millions of people will starve around the world. And we made a concerted effort, including across the table to Olaf Scholz at that meeting. I said, you've got the opportunity now to resolve this. And thankfully, with the help of the G7, the United Nations, Turkey, and Russia, that port was opened up and those people didn't starve. So that is how crucial and important shipping and ports and trade is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, my lord. You spoke there to my heart. You spoke to my raison d'etre, which is people. You spoke to people's lives and the fact that people were going to starve. The head then of the World Food Program, good friend of mine, David, yes, I worked very closely with David in dealing with the northeast of Nigeria when we were facing famine. And I know that much of the grain and much of the food in those days was coming from Ukraine. So it's important that we've spoken not just to trade, but we also speak to people, because we speak about these things as though it's abstract. We speak as though we're trying to just build economies and build nations, forgetting that there are actually human beings. This is about people. And I'm going to come back to you, Umesh, about that in a bit. But before that, I'm going to go back to sorry, Umesh, you're Anusha. I'm going to go back to the chairman of the Mumbai Port Authority, Nehru Port Authority in Mumbai. And first of all, I want to say I am so heartbroken that we're not in Mumbai. So I hope that next year we will be with you in Mumbai so that we can actually come and visit the port. I was in Mumbai just last month and was so blown away by the infrastructure development and looking at some of the port's sort of infrastructure. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very good morning to all of you. It's very heartening to meet Lord Karan again. He visited Jain Port last year, April, and with his MP colleagues. As AD told that she saw a lot of infrastructure in Mumbai, and Mumbai is definitely undergoing a lot of infrastructural work, and many infrastructure come up, and much more is also planned and much more in pipeline. Coming back to the subject, India and Africa, we share a common past, colonial past. We are also having the common social issues, the population and all other things. So we want to partner with Africa in port sector, in logistics sector. Africa also has more than 26,000 kilometers of coast. They have 100 odd ports. But the major issue with Africa is the intra-Africa trade is not much. And I just mentioned here that in India, our largest partner, the China and UAE, they are Asian countries. So to have this intra-Africa trade, India would like to partner with Africa, and our government's vision is very straightforward and simple, that we want to partner with Africa. We want that our industrialists should go there and set up factories in Africa so that the raw material should be used to manufacture value-added products which will be sold in the Africa continent, and also if there is a surplus to the other countries. So it should not be the colonial kind of setup that where we require the raw materials from Africa and then we want to process it in our country and then send as a market to the Africa. That kind of setup we don't want. And India is partnering with Africa. To give one example, last year when the Honorable President of Tanzania was in India, in the presence of our Honorable Prime Minister, India and Tanzania signed one agreement where it is decided that the Jawaharlal Nehru Port Authority set up one free trade zone in Tanzania so that the Indian industrialists and industrialists from all over the world can set up their factories there. So this kind of infrastructure development with partnering with the African country is envisaged in India's policy towards Africa. We would also like to share our experience because in last decade, we have done many efforts in the infrastructure and logistics sector, especially related to port, and certain programs which are very successful. One of that is the Sagarmala, another is the Bharatmala, then PM Gati Shakti, then National Logistic Policy. All these programs, our experience, we want to share with Africa and partner with them so that mutually we could do certain things for the mutual benefit.
Thank you very much, Umesh. You talk about partnering and you talk about our colonial past, which is interesting because, and I like to think of life in bridges, and it's really interesting to have my lord here who literally bridges that colonial past and the present in many ways. And I loved what you also said about the history and the fact that, you know, that ship that your family was involved with building now sits, a battleship which sits there in the UK. There is much in the past that we sometimes repudiate, but I think also we must learn from the past, and we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, we must embrace what was good from it, and we must, you know, learn and reshape that which didn't work. I think part of what, in many ways, that past has done, I speak as an African who also lives in Fiji, so I must bring the Pacific into this conversation. You know, I speak as an African is that, you know, we have been divided in many ways. You know, we have been weaponized one against the other. We have been, you know, the world, or maybe those, that some powers that be have pitched us one against the other. But indeed, you're right. We have common challenges. We have common issues. We have common cultures in many ways. You know, whenever I come to India, I'm stunned by, I was in Pune recently, and I went to meet the chairman of Serum Institute, Uncle Cyrus. And as I greeted Uncle Cyrus, he said, "But you're like an Indian." He said, "You know, you call uncle, your cultures are the same. We are very similar in many ways." And, you know, if nothing else, you know, and I want to thank ORF and Samir and my friends here for ensuring that we're bringing, and I mean, Prime Minister Modi, the Honorable Prime Minister, was just in Abuja, Nigeria, 3 days ago, and he said this. He talked about, you know, bringing us all together, and talked about the fact that our similarities, there is more that brings us together than that which keeps us apart. And these connections and being on joint platforms are a really critical thing to ensure that we learn from that colonial past. We don't repudiate it, but we build upon the lessons of the past. So that I want to bridge into the sort of next section of this, and we have 15 minutes. You mentioned Tanzania, and I know that we have Ambassador John Ulanga here, from Tanzania, who's a special advisor to the president of Tanzania. So I would like to know if anyone has a roving mic, because I would like Ambassador John to speak very briefly to that. Does anyone have a roving mic? Do I have a roving mic? Thank you. Where's Ambassador John? Ambassador John, do I have you in the room? He's not here? Oh, what a shame. What a shame. That is such a shame. I wonder where he is, because it would have been great to riff off what you just said and you know, bring in the sort of the whole Tanzania angle into the conversation. If anyone knows where Ambassador John is, please find him. But having said that, I'm going to actually go very quickly back to Kenya, since we don't have Tanzania in the room, and go back to you to respond almost to that reach out for partnership. How do we lean into that? How do we lean into the partnership offer? How do we in Africa connect with our brothers and sisters here on the Indian subcontinent?
Thank you very much for that question. The intervention I want to make is that there are many ways in which we can link up. First and foremost, we are grateful that during the presidency of G20, India's presidency of G20 is when we were admitted as African Union. Although we think soon we should move away from that, because African Union is not one country. We are 54 African countries. But we appreciate that the Indian Prime Minister, who is a big friend of the African continent, was able to push for that during his presidency of the G20. Now, India, as we normally say here in the Indian Ocean, is like a big brother. Although one of the Indian generals was telling me, but we are a big brother who doesn't want to lord over you, and which is a good thing. So we are open to strengthening the collaboration between us and India because it is mutually beneficial to both India and African countries, individual and collectively, for us to have that partnership in all the areas, whether it is trade, skills development, technology transfer, to mention but a few of the areas, even healthcare. As you know, most of our citizens come to India to see Indian doctors and to get treatment. And so that is something that we are open to. We are willing to work with them. And just to respond to what was said earlier on, to connect Africa, like for example, you talked of DRC, we can learn from India's program on inland waterways, because like DRC has a very large navigable river, the Congo River. There are many land-linked African countries that have big rivers and also lakes. And so we can be able to develop inland water transport in those countries, maybe borrow from India, they've been doing it, as the minister said, then we'll be able to open up the hinterland of Africa for trade and also for free movement of people. And so that is one of the things I wanted to say. But within Africa already there is a conversation going on for the countries to be linked from the east, where we are, to the west, with the road network, with the rail network, so that we open up the heart of Africa. And so Indian companies have an opportunity, because India is a subcontinent, which is very big and geographically diverse. They have an opportunity of working with individual African governments in ensuring that we develop the necessary infrastructure that is needed to open up the hinterland of Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. That's very well said. Indeed, it was India's presidency of the G20, and I had the privilege of being here for much of it last year, that really pushed hard for the Africa Union to become a formal member of, so it's now the G21. We should actually be calling it now, not the G20. I had the privilege of taking the Africa seat during many of those meetings. Last year I was the representative of Africa all over India, and saw how keenly India pushed for us to become a member. It is now for us to lean into that and truly occupy that space. As you talk about intra-Africa trade, let's now talk about, you know, trade, sort of how Africa is and India, you know, the sort of, I'm going to go to the social very quickly, because, I mean, Lord Karen brought up the whole issue of food and how people were affected when ports were closed. I mean, we saw that during COVID as well, not just with war. We saw during COVID, you know, what the slowdown in trade, and even when, do you all remember when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, what it did to global trade flows? But how it affects people is why I want to come to you now.
Thanks, Yodi, and I'll stick to the time. So I think port cities are, they're contributing to close to 55%, 60% of trade, and that's a known figures. We look at JNPT, it's like 6 million TEUs, and there's Port of Durban, and you know, all of those which are contributing to a lot of TEU. But I think the most important challenge in the whole blue economy ecosystem is to ensure that these benefits are shared inclusively and equally. I think that's the biggest challenge that we are facing. Yeah, and I think for that, a few important factors that we can set thought leadership for would be job creation, skill development, and apart from that, while we look at environmental indicators, when port cities are being developed, I think a very important aspect of that will be social impact assessment, because that is something that is always brought in later. So probably at the planning stage, if we could also look at having social impact assessment indicators which are set at global standards when we look at you know, sustainable goals, I think that is going to be really, really critical. And it's possible because we have the port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. They're doing, you know, they're employing 5,000 local artisans already within the blue economy system. There's Kandla in Gujarat, there's Cochin, there's Chennai. They're already doing a lot of local community-based involvement during, you know, at the planning stage for port development. So I think that will be very critical. Apart from that, another aspect, and probably the most important one, would also be to engage in a sister city engagement. Probably port cities can partner through collaborative frameworks and see how we can share knowledge, how we can share expertise to involve people.
Thank you very much, Anusha. I love it. I love actionable things. So you've proposed an actionable thing. You've proposed sister cities, and you've talked about the linkage with people. I believe we have Ambassador John now, so if somebody can get him a mic, because I really want to hear, since this is talking about the African, you know, the linkages between Africa and India. We heard about the African, where is Ambassador John? We heard about the African free continental trade area, and we also heard about the zone in Tanzania. Ambassador John Olanga.
No, thanks, and I'm sorry I stepped out when you called me earlier. Maybe more, probably rather than a contribution, is the question. I think it's important, this conversation, that we talk about increased ocean connectivity between Africa, Asia, and Europe. But I had a thought, especially because of the potential for the African continental free trade area. And yesterday we talked about, I think someone's talked about Indian flagged, Indian owned ships. But how many, and especially to my brother from Kenya, how many countries in Africa own ships? And if you talk about AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, one of the biggest bottleneck is transport, not only inland transport, but also ocean transport. So aren't we seeing a huge opportunity for increased investment in shipping lines in Africa to connect Africa, and through connecting Africa, I think it will make it even easier to connect Africa to the rest of the world. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador John. Another practical suggestion. Excellent. Excellent. We have another question? Okay, take some more questions. If there are other questions, I would like you to please, there's a couple of mics. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor. I see a hand up there. If you can just head to the nearest mic, it's easier. Thank you. There's somebody at a mic already. Over to you.
Thank you. My name is Peter Tony Setchel, Vice President of the First Nation Chamber of Commerce in South Africa. Now, this, with respect, is but a humble suggestion going forward. It is common cause that the globe has become smaller. Smaller in the sense that it is interconnected. And Europe, India, and Asia have inevitably realized that the global south is not the far-off, long-lost cousin of yesteryear, but a crucial player in world markets, in investment, in maritime connectivity and sustainability. Now, this realization is noble, and I have to applaud the Indian government, the ORF, and everybody who made this esteemed conference such a glowing success that it is. However, I could elaborate on the role of the rest of Africa in this multimodal corridor of trade and development, but allow me rather to put my hand in my own South African bosom and state what the thorny lived experiences are of our people. My beloved South Africa is a country drowning in crippling corruption at the moment, on all levels of government and the private sector, with no or very little accountability and action from law enforcement agencies. And all these efforts, noble efforts, being discussed during this conference could come to naught in my country if your good selves are not circumspect about with whom and how you deal with entities, individuals, and institutions in my country. But we all know, and that's a fact, that corruption eats away, it erodes the social, ethical, moral, judicial, and legal fabric of a country. Now that is the South African reality. It is respectfully in this light that I humbly submit that future conferences of this nature and magnitude must include on their agendas discussions on legislative and regulatory systems and procedures of the state parties and the participants, and exclude those entities implicated in wrongdoing despite the internal law enforcement agencies not acting against them. In effect, I implore you to adopt a zero-tolerance approach to corruption, and that way the goals of this conference shall become a glowing success. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your suggestion. Over to the next. Do we have anybody at the next mic?
Yeah, that's me, please.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely delighted by the insightful conversations that you've had in the course of the last 45 minutes. My name is Deepak Shetty. I was a former career civil servant in the Government of India. I retired as Secretary in the Government of India, also served as Director General of Shipping for a couple of years. I echo the sentiments which all of you articulated. I'm equally gung-ho in terms of the exponential potential for all the connectivity and the trade volumes that could grow. But I just wanted to draw your kind attention, and I do not wish to be sounding very disparaging. I hope, my apologies if I do come across, but this is just a ground reality check that I just wanted to put it across. Having seen this empirically, in terms of what awaits certain pockets in the African continent for the merchant shipping sector in particular, both in the West African and the East African corridors. And what I'm referring to is armed robbery, piracy, and terrorism. Hugely disruptive forces, which at a given point of time, they were rampantly prevalent. But dare I say that probably unless there is a fix on the land or the shore side, and if somebody doesn't get a handle on that, I think that will continue to plague the minds of the merchant shipping sector, and more importantly, the seafarers who man the merchant ships, in terms of what is going to be otherwise deemed to be a fairly seamless connectivity. So just wanted to invite attention to some of these moles and warts, as it were, that are prevalent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to remind us that this is a conference that is looking forward, and I want to remind us that whilst we recognize that there are challenges, I want to also remind us that we are trying to talk about positivity and how to overcome those challenges. And so whilst we recognize the challenges, let us not allow those challenges to be the driving, the take-home message. Lord Karen.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, because if I had been asked to come in again, I was going to bring this point up. And I just want to say a couple of things because we're running out of time. I want to applaud Prime Minister Modi and India, because I represented the Confederation of British Industry at the B20 and the G20 last year. It is India, as the head of the G20, that brought in the African Union to join the G20. And I think it was fantastic. And I think that when we're talking about ports and when we're talking about shipping, we are talking about more and more being multilateral, about promoting free trade, about promoting the environment. And my dear friend President Nasheed is over here, and I chaired the Maldives All-Party Parliamentary Group. We still charge duty in the UK on Maldive tuna. And the tuna in the Maldives is fished using line fishing, not using nets, fished in as environmental a way as possible, and yet we're starting the duty. We should not be charging that duty at all. And trade and security go hand in hand. The former secretary made this point. Today, trade is disrupted in a big way through BAM and the Straits of Hormuz. Many, many ships are not going through the Suez Canal because they're worried about being attacked. That should not happen. And this is where we need to work together, and where the navies of our world come together. And the Indian Navy, the UK Navy, two very powerful navies, should be working together to make sure that ships are safe from piracy and from terrorists. And you're absolutely right to bring up that point. Thank you very much. The environment. We have not spoken much about the environment. The person speaking about photography earlier on mentioned biodiversity. At my university, Cambridge University in the UK, Professor Sir Partha Dasgupta, Indian professor, has written a report on the economics of biodiversity. And he says there are 1 million species on this planet that are at threat of extinction. And nature is our most precious asset. And I love scuba diving, and I go scuba diving around the world. And I tell you, when I go to a spot again, I can see underwater the difference if you've had the effect of climate change and the erosion of our biodiversity. So multilateral trade, trade and security, and the environment, those are things we've got to focus on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lord Karen. Robert, as Robert is coming up, I want to say that what you said about the environment is particularly pertinent given what we're experiencing in Delhi this week. You know, as we talk about climate change, and as our other colleagues are at COP29 in Baku, you know, the effects of climate change, the effects on the environment, the effects of pollution are really, really beginning to show their hand. I was shocked when I got off the plane yesterday morning because I literally couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And this is a real issue. And over to you, Robert. I'll finish that thought later. Sorry. Not Robert.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to give a thanks to Observer Research Foundation and the Ministry of Ports and Shipping and Waterways of organizing this conference in India. It is time that India is in these discussions in a proactive way. It's a very important actor to change the balance. And I bring attention to one important event that is going to happen next year. the UN, United Nations Ocean Conference in Nice, France in 2025. India must be heard its voice in there. It cannot be silent. And when you compare India to China, you know what is geography. China is a rimland, but also is surrounded. Many neighbors and is constrained by that. But India has an open ocean of its own. And that's a big difference. Take that advantage, and if you do it sustainably, then you could say the future is now, and we can build a better world together in a prosperous way with equal benefits and more equal benefits to everyone. And you can count with Portugal for that also.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Over to you, Jeffrey, for one last word. We're running out of time, and I know there's a break afterwards, but we have just one last word from my final panelist. No, I've already asked. He said no.
Thank you very much. I think I'm very grateful for the feedback that we're getting from the floor. I just want to add one or two things. One is I completely agree with the Lord, with my Lord here, that we have to strengthen our security partnership within the Indian Ocean. And so the EU countries together with India and African countries must work together to ensure that our seas are safe and secure. And then secondly, I want to thank Ambassador John for bringing up the issue of ship ownership. Actually, as the minister, the Honorable Minister was speaking about India becoming among the top 5 shipbuilding nations, I think do not forget that we also want to play in that league at some point. And so there's an opportunity for shipbuilding, ship repair, and also ship recycling. How we dispose vessels under the Hong Kong Convention, which are no longer seaworthy. And so India, together with the other countries, can work with African nations in ensuring that we achieve the objective of strengthening shipbuilding and ship recycling and repair. Finally, on the issue of corruption, which my brother from South Africa talked about, yes, indeed, we must have policy, institutional and legal reforms that will govern any resources that will be spent on mega projects in our continent and in other parts of the world. So corruption has been a problem, but we have to tackle it head on. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very, very much. And as I wrap up this session, thank you all to my esteemed panelists. You all have done an incredible job of educating me, not to talk about everybody else here. We live in a world of polycrisis. We live in a world that's beset by conflict, by climate, by many, many things. In my field, we deal with health crises, we deal with emerging pandemics. But we have to look to the future. We have to look at the bridges, the things that connect us, move away from those that divide us. As we talked about, Milord, and many of you referred to security and terrorism, we see it all over the world. We see wars around the world. But we must not focus on the negative. Whilst we deal with the negative, we must focus on the way forward. The way forward is the rising South. The way forward is the partnerships that we all have. The way forward is developing new frontiers, developing new economic models, developing the digital world. As we heard, we are killing the planet with all the paper. And the paper, and as you talked about trade, is on paper. The paper does not give us accountability because you can hide bits of paper, but when it is digital, it brings transparency and it sheds light. So this panel has been incredible. We have talked about the social effects. We've talked not enough about the effects potentially of shipping and the inclusion of women and girls in shipping. We have heard the offer from India to partner with Africa. We've heard about the European Green Channel, and we've heard a lot about what is going on globally and also from the UK and the historical nature of the partnerships in shipping, also even in a personal way. So with that, I want to thank my panel. Tanubi is standing there small but mighty. She's terrifying. She's given me already 9 extra minutes. But I want to say thank you very much to the panel for a great discussion. We will continue the conversations over coffee. I invite you to join them outside and to chat with them and to ask various questions. Thank you very much for listening. Over to you, Tanubi.
Could I invite the speakers to come up on the stage for a family photo, and all our guests here? We are having a short break of 10 minutes. Please join us at 12:20 sharp for the next session, which is on energy and shipping. For the delegates who are joining us from outside India and who are staying with us, we have a travel desk right next to the reception for your airport drop-offs. Please contact my colleagues for